and hence kind of the role that I enjoy is if you're, I think the best entrepreneurs, they obviously have their own ideas and they're kind of determined, right, to be successful in whatever they're pursuing at the time. But if you can, if they should hopefully surround themselves with people who are experienced, have knowledge, people that they can listen to and learn from along the way. And I find that the best entrepreneurs have enough confidence in themselves to do that, right? Yeah. Sometimes you run into entrepreneurs who don't want to be surrounded by people who know more than they do because it challenges them, right?
Yes.
And oftentimes that ends up being a bit of a fatal flaw.
It's not how much money you make, but how much money you keep, how hard it works for you, and how many generations you keep it for. On this episode of High Value Discussions, we are honored to learn and dive into the heart of technology, investing, and innovation with a guest whose name symphonizes with visionary entrepreneurship and groundbreaking investments. My guest is a true example of financial acumen and a testament to a relentless pursuits of high-achieving excellence. From the ground up, he's played a pivotal roles in startups, strategized over boardroom tables as a consultant, and now as a venture capitalist with Adam Street Partners. He played a formidable role in setting the stage for companies that are tomorrow's tech titans. But what truly sets my guest apart is his belief in the power of bright, motivated visionaries. He sees his role as a strategic ally, a supporting actor in the epic saga of entrepreneurship. He's not just investing, he's nurturing success stories, scouting for the best talents, and championing the narratives of the companies he believes in. With a laser focus on business-to-business software technology companies, his expertise spans the critical realms of cloud computing, internet infrastructure, security, and software as a service sector. At Adam Street Partners, he spearheads investments that are not just significant, but transformative. His academic credentials are as impressive as his professional milestones. With a foundation built at Stanford University, where he earned a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering and a Master of Science in Industrial Engineering. He went on to hone his business acumen with an MBA from Harvard Business School. In a world where technology is the frontier, he's not just witnessing the change, but actively driving it. He is a beacon for entrepreneurs and a testament to what's possible when vision meets the rigor of venture capital. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Fred Wang.
My parents were immigrants. They came over from, originally China by way of Taiwan and then Europe. And my my dad was an entrepreneur. And so that actually was one of the genesis of my interest in the whole entrepreneurial community.
Yeah.
He also was technical, was an engineering background, so also my love for engineering and science and the like. So that's originally kind of the seeds that were planted.
So you were able to see that growing up, like in your development phase throughout like an early age? Was he always an entrepreneur while you were young?
He was, yeah. I mean, really, he started his own business. He was actually a professional photographer, but actually started a business that was around photography, primarily around kind of high-end camera equipment.
Yes.
And so I saw the challenges with being an entrepreneur firsthand.
Well, did you ever get to shadow him while you were young?
I worked in his shop in summers and growing up. So and my mother was also worked alongside him too. So it was very much a family business.
You hear that a lot where you shouldn't have a business when it correlates to family, but I feel like there's a difference. I guess it's based on culture or based on people's environments. What is your experience in that?
Well, I mean, it can be difficult. I mean, I've definitely, we saw a lot of stress obviously come from the business itself. I've also, my wife also had a family business that she was involved with, which also was really challenging. So, I in general, I tell people that if you that you have to be really careful, I think. Family or close friends,
Yeah.
because business will put a lot of strain on those relationships.
Yes, I hear it breaks a lot of families apart as well. I've heard
It
stories
can.
about that.
Yeah.
But your situation, it wasn't like that. I mean, the
No,
challenge was good.
Yeah, I mean, well, look, it was not, at the end of the day, it was successful in the sense that it provided a living, but it was never like a big business. It had a chance to be, and I think, along the way, he made some missteps. And again, I think that kind of gave me a firsthand appreciation of what entrepreneurs face, the challenges they have, and really gave me kind of the motivation to get into this line of business, which is at its heart helping entrepreneurs be successful.
I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs, when they scale their businesses, a lot of problems arise. And sometimes a lot of people can handle it. Some people can't.
Starting a business, running a business, and growing a business, there's a lot of work, right? And a lot of challenges that come through that. But also, a lot of the markets that we're focused on are also going through a lot of change, and so that adds a layer of complexity to it. They're usually fairly technical, right?
Yes.
And so that too adds another layer of complexity. Not only are you trying to run a business, but you're also kind of creating new technology along the way.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I love that combination. It's pretty fascinating. I wanted to be around entrepreneurs and entrepreneurialism in general. I wanted to be around technology, and I think I grew up here in the Bay Area, and so you're surrounded by it even at an early age. And then, it was, I guess, in high school that I started paying a lot more attention to what was going on from a company standpoint. I'll never forget, there was an article about Apple Computer back when I was in high school, and they were just becoming, successful and well-known. And I read the article and talked about, Steve Jobs and the team and kind of what they were doing, which I thought was fascinating. But also they talked about the venture capitalists behind them. And I thought, wait a minute, that seems really intriguing, right? You don't, you can be involved with the entrepreneurs, the startup companies, helping them through success, but there's other ways to do it that you don't have to be the person driving the startup itself, right? And again, coming back to like seeing my father's trials and tribulations, that was actually really appealing to me, right? So helping entrepreneurs be successful when I saw how he struggled and didn't really have any help, and not sure that he would listen to help if he had it, but that type of role I think was really appealing to me. I know people who get into medicine because they had family history, some experience with someone in their family go through a medical challenge when they were young. And I think similarly for me, it was seeing, the entrepreneurial challenge and feeling like, hey, if there's something I can do to help and be of, support to entrepreneurs, I'd love to do that.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's kind of what I originally, I think, had a seed plan in my mind around, a venture capital might be an interesting pathway.
Yeah.
And so when I went to college, I had that in the back of my mind.
Obviously, the universities that you attended and the schooling, the education, I feel like you get to meet a lot of people. I've interviewed a lot of people from Stanford, and they talk about that, the networking aspect there, that you get to meet such a variety of different people, the ideas being spread out. I feel like that's one of the benefit things when it comes to going to Stanford or Harvard.
Yeah. I mean, I think for sure the network and the people that you connect with, I think, are critical to both your long-term professional success, but also your personal growth along the way. When I went to college, I very much had in the back of my mind that I wanted to take advantage of it.
Yes.
Right. We, our family didn't have much financial means. So for me, it was important to figure out how was I going to get ahead, and leverage college to do that. And so, when I went to Stanford, I made a promise to myself that I'd meet someone new every day that I was there. And I really tried to take advantage of that. And I think that again, it's has its professional advantages, but also just from a personal fulfillment standpoint, it was really powerful.
And honestly, that takes a lot of confidence. Did you have confidence at a young age, approaching somebody every day?
No, well, it's funny. I guess I kind of had to teach it to myself. I remember in high school reading these books about like, how to have conversations, how to, engage with other people. How do you, there was one book that I remember reading, how to influence people or whatever, right? And so there's a lot of the psychological elements of it that I think I became a little bit of a student of and tried to put that into practice as I was, meeting people and engaging with people.
Yeah. And then obviously in your experience when it comes to your education, what's probably one of the biggest things that it gave you?
Well, so I studied electrical engineering and computer science at a time when those things were somewhat conflated. And for me, because I knew I wanted to get into technology, I didn't think I wanted to be an engineer long term, but I wanted to make sure I had a really strong technical grounding. I really wanted to get into venture capital long term, right? And so, but I felt like you really had to have technical, a foundation, an understanding of it, so that you could, hopefully, make better decisions, right, and understand what was happening. And so, so I pursued a more technical degree, and it does give you, I think, confidence that, when people are throwing technical issues or terms or ideas at you, that at least you have some basis of understanding for it. You may not be the expert, by any means, but at least, you have some foundation.
Like say when you're graduating, you're completely done with your education, right? And then now it's starting to jump into the adventures that you've obviously majored in, so on and so forth. Was it intimidating at first, or did you feel a sense of belonging right away?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say that I went into my early job roles feeling pretty comfortable, right? That, because it wasn't, I didn't, I wasn't trying to cure cancer. It wasn't like really, really hard technical kind of conceptual issues. It was just more, can you do the job and can you be effective at doing it, and can you come up with good solutions in a, in a time efficient way? And so, one of the jobs I had early on, this is during college, was a software engineering job at the time, a startup company, Intuit. They were, literally just a couple of engineers, and they were shipping product already. And, they asked me to come in and help with some projects that kind of became more expanded, because at a fast-growing startup company, it's sort of all hands on deck. Yes. And I will say that, doing the things that were put in front of me were not that intimidating. But I do remember that one of the questions that one of the founders had posed to me was, well, Fred, can you help us, review our engineering process and suggest ways that we can be more productive with our software engineering? And I'm like, I study computer science, but I know nothing about, software engineering at scale. So, and that to me just felt like, wow, I don't even know where to start with that. And I think the lesson for me there too was that even though the startup was exciting and doing incredible things and ultimately became a very large success story over time, that for me personally, I felt like I had to get more exposure to successful companies before really plugging into something like that, because you just don't know what you don't know, and to learn by doing along the way can be a kind of a costly path to go down.
And I feel like that's how people learn as they go, like that individual who's kind of giving you that question, can you do this, can you do that? And you're like, I'm not sure if I can, but let's see if I can. Right. Let's try a little bit. I think that's what entrepreneurs, they grow that way by just keep doing it. They feel like they have to know everything in order to start, but I feel like you learn it as you go.
Yeah, well, and I think also importantly, and hence kind of the role that I enjoy is if you're, I think the best entrepreneurs, they obviously have their own ideas and they're kind of determined, right, to be successful in whatever they're pursuing at the time. But if you can, if they should hopefully surround themselves with people who are experienced, have knowledge, people that they can listen to and learn from along the way. And I find that the best entrepreneurs have enough confidence in themselves to do that, right? Yeah. Sometimes you run into entrepreneurs who don't want to be surrounded by people who know more than they do because it challenges them, right?
Yes.
And oftentimes that ends up being a bit of a fatal flaw.
Do you bump into those a lot?
Well, you run into all types for sure. Yeah, there are some that fall in that category.
Do they ever try to pitch you their idea, but you also have to know the individual behind the company and business? I feel like that's a very important aspect.
Oh yeah. Well, and coming back to kind of your earlier question around knowing networking and connecting with people, I think one of the important assets that you need to have in the venture capital business, and one that you certainly develop over time as you're in it, or in Silicon Valley in general, or tech, or whatever market you're in, is that you do get to know a lot of people. And it's very rare that we would invest in a company or behind a management team that we don't have some way of checking out through kind of trusted sources. And so that network, I think, is critical.
I would assume that there has to be like a lot of digging to go in within the individual, but I feel like that's where the network comes in handy, because it's word of mouth. But also when you're in the room with the individual, what kind of questions are you asking this entrepreneur, like say their experience, their background, like what are those questions like?
It falls into a few different categories. And I should also delineate that, today what I'm doing is more growth stage investing. So these are companies that are already kind of up and running, and they have customers and revenue and the like. And so the types of questions you might ask then for that type of situation might be a little different than if you're going to be the first venture investor, the company's just getting off the ground. It's a concept, right?
Yes.
So there's I would kind of differentiate between those two. And I used to do that for a couple of decades. And so, to answer that particular question, you're really trying to get to know the entrepreneur and understand what motivates them, why are they pursuing this particular problem, and then you're also looking for those kind of clues around, how intellectually curious is this person, how much are they willing to listen to other people and get feedback. How good are they at building team, right, around them, and attracting people who might be, more qualified than they are to follow them, right? And so you're looking for leadership qualities, you're looking for personal qualities, and you're looking for potential red flags around this person wants to retain control in a way that can be destructive, right, or any of those types of things that might create problems down the road. Now, it's an inexact science, obviously, right? And I think you're wrong as often as you're right in terms of gauging people and their abilities and their development over time.
Yes.
But you do hopefully try to avoid some of the kind of the clear red flags.
Yeah. What are the biggest red flags that you see in an entrepreneur or a business?
Well, I mean, to start with, the easier ones are like, gosh, is there even a problem that they're solving that's important, right? Yeah. Or are they approaching it in a way that you think can be successful? Do they have an offering, a product, or a service that really is differentiated? So there's some really fundamental kind of things that you're trying to filter out right out the gate. So, I mean, assuming you've kind of gone through that and, they're qualified for the problem they're trying to solve, and that the problem set they're going after is a big enough problem, and you think can be create enough value in the business they're building. Then you're looking for those more subtle things, right? Which is, is this person can they grow in the role if they're a first time CEO? You obviously every successful CEO is a first time CEO at some point, right? And so you have to make sure that you give people the opportunity and surround them with ways to succeed.
Yes.
But you also want to make sure that they're not going to, that they have the ability to take advantage of that, right? So it is things like the confidence to admit when you don't know, or to put people in place that might be better than you are. And I do find that probably the bigger issues tend to be one around, what's the ultimate motivation, right? Sometimes we run into entrepreneurs who, they just want to make money, right? And so at some point, that, again, starting these companies, it's hard work, right? And you're going to go through some really difficult challenges along the way, where maybe if you don't have the grit or the determination, that you may not stick with it. Alternatively, there might be situations where, hey, we can sell the company, and I can make, I as an entrepreneur can make, some money here. And I think as a venture capitalist, what you're really trying to do is find the companies that really can become long-lasting, significant businesses. And so you don't want companies to sell too quickly. And I will say that is a common, it could be successful, but it's also a failure because the company didn't reach its potential.
Yeah.
And so that's where you have to find entrepreneurs who have kind of the vision as opposed to I just want to take money off the table.
Profit is always great, but I feel like there has to be another meaning and fulfillment behind it. What are you solving? Are you serving other people? Are you helping other people along the way? I feel like that's the first thing that has to come out of their mouth before about profits.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the market that you're going after, but I think most people understand that you're creating this company to create value, right? Financial value.
Yes.
So you don't want to entirely lose sight of that, but if that's the only thing, or if that's the very top thing you're focused on, then I don't think that's how you create great companies.
You have been a venture capitalist for many, many years. What are probably some of the biggest challenges that you've faced, and how did you bounce back from them?
Well, I'm trying to think where to start. I mean, there's always the companies that you invest in that aren't successful. And that's just the nature of the beast. I mean, it comes with being in this business, right? You're going to fail more often than you're successful. And so it's really trying to handle, I think it's trying to identify those situations as early as you can. Yeah. And then trying to plot a way, forward for the business, the team, et cetera, that is maybe the least painful, right? If you know the company is not going to be successful, then how do you find an exit for it or shut it down or whatever in as graceful a way as you can, so that you're not disrupting people, the team, the customers, shareholders, et cetera. Yes. And so there is always a little bit of that. And often you're in situations where people they may not agree with you. They may not want to do the exact same thing, that have the same end goals. So there can be a lot of friction in those situations that for me is not enjoyable. I think you have to be, I think a lot of venture capitalists like the success stories where everything's going great and you don't have to have those hard conversations. So how you handle those difficult ones is always can be a bit of a challenge. Yeah. So that's just a regular part of the business. I'll say, the venture industry, I've been in it, almost 30 years now, and it's gone through a lot of change and cycles. It goes through its normal cycles, and, the downdrafts can be really scary. For me, the first one that I experienced was really the dot-com bust. And then there was the great financial crisis, and those were very different experiences. And so a lot of it has to do with, your business. Put aside the portfolio and the companies you're involved with and the entrepreneurs. Your business as a venture capitalist feels like it could be at risk. And so that too can be challenging. Your funds might get smaller, and therefore you have to fire partners that you're working with, right? So how do you navigate that? How do you figure that out? Or alternatively, the exit opportunities for the IPO market, as an example, like it is today, could be really quiet, and so you don't have a lot of liquidity, and your investors are asking for liquidity. So how do you manage that, right? Yeah. So I think one of the things that's most rewarding about this job is, clearly being involved with success stories, but also, navigating the failures in a way that you think can be as graceful as possible.
I mean, growing up, I always used to be afraid and scared of failure, but I feel like embracing it with open arms is just, made me better as a man and as an individual. So that's why I kind of just welcome it. We embrace it and we kind of smile at the chaos a little bit. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, and it's interesting. You find that entrepreneurs, other investors, people around the table, in difficult situations, you really get a much better sense of who they are, right, and their values and their personalities, integrity, things like that. And, there's been situations where I've invested behind someone who's been unsuccessful, has been an unsuccessful investment for us, because you really get a chance to see what that person's made out of, right? And when everything's going great, there's not a lot of individual challenge, necessarily. And so you may not really pressure test, what someone's, values really are and what their personality really is like. So that too, I think, is also a really good learning experience. And that's part of kind of, my comment earlier around trying to find graceful, when things fail, how do you do it in a way that's graceful, that you learn from, right? And that you don't burn too many bridges along the way, is because of that. Silicon Valley technology is all about, trying, failing, trying again, and hopefully finding success, right?
Yes.
And so you have to embrace the failure as well.
Yeah. Is it very surprising to you that's still involved in this business that especially in Silicon Valley, that you'll meet certain people and they don't like challenge. They kind of keep to themselves because my skills and my ideas is what makes me successful. I don't need a team. I don't need you to tell me what to do or this and that, or they don't have any mentors or there's no leadership. It's all about me. And it's so strange to me that they're still walking around thinking, I feel like they're here for a short amount of time, not long term.
Right.
Is that very surprising that you still spot people around here like that?
Well, no, we in the past I'd call them kind of tourists, right? And you see every time there's a big boom, again, the .com boom, right? And certainly more recently the tech boom that's happened in the last call it decade or so. You do get a lot of people who get attracted to the story around Silicon Valley and the excitement around technology, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, maybe just the money that might be involved, right? And so you have, anytime there's a gold rush, I think you get people who are, out there the prospectors out there trying to find their way. And again, that's when it comes back to why are you doing what you're doing, right? If it's purely because you think it's a way to make an easy buck, and things don't go well, that's when you see those people get flushed out. Right?
Yeah.
And I just don't, I think that's just human nature and the nature of any business sector where there's a lot of wealth creation, fast wealth creation. And in Silicon Valley increasingly has become high profile wealth creation, right?
Yes.
So that doesn't surprise me that you get a lot of people who are just there for the glitter.
And I feel like you are the perfect person to ask this, but what makes a great entrepreneur? Like their traits, their principles to be successful as an entrepreneur. What do you think is that thing that defines them as great?
Well, and I will say that there are different models, right? So there isn't, I think, just one typecast. I think sometimes people like to fall back to Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or whatever, right? And there's some icons that you can think of who, in some cases, can be pretty challenging personalities, right? And therefore, there's this lure of, you need to be wearing the black turtlenecks and being really difficult personality in order to be successful. And I actually don't ascribe to that. Yes, you can be with those traits, but what I think what we tend to look for are people, and I hit on some of this before, but you're looking for people who, first of all, have a passion for the problem that they're trying to solve, right? They feel it deep down inside, and they live and eat and breathe it. Number one. Number two, they have to be resilient, right? Because you are going to hit these speed bumps along the way. A third, I think, hopefully they have growth mindsets, right? Which is, I'm going to fail at certain things. So what do I learn from that? How do I adjust, and how do I do it better the next time around? And surprisingly, there are a lot of people who don't have a hard time being able to judge themselves around that, because that, coming back to confidence and what have you have to have some degree of self-confidence to really look at yourself and figure out what you did wrong and be willing to admit it. So I think that's an important aspect. Our firm, I like entrepreneurs who have they're in it not just for themselves, but they're really trying to, make things successful for their employees, the management team, the employees, the shareholders, right? And so they're thinking about the community more broadly Well, certainly their customers, but they're thinking about the community more broadly. And it's not just about how do I, maximize my personal outcome, right?
Yes, yeah.
And so when we say, gosh, the most successful companies, they are ones that they're not ones where it's like, oh, I made a big return on this, but rather it's companies that really changed the industry they're going after and employed a lot of people, right? And are still successful and evolving along the way. And so those are the ones that we're, hoping to back.
Did you ever meet an entrepreneur that was very grounded, very true to his principles and values, but then the ego kind of got big? Have you ever dealt with somebody like that?
Yeah, no, you for sure. No, you see a lot of that, sure. Yeah. And not just entrepreneurs, but just anyone in business. Yeah, I mean, again, having been in Silicon Valley pretty much my whole life, you see people that I've come across a lot of people early in their career, and then you see over a couple decades that they've had some success that it changes who they are.
So how do you stay grounded? For a man who has touched and been through so much success, how do you personally stay grounded?
Well, look, I think, first of all, I think there's a lot of luck involved in anyone's success, right? And I think sometimes people lose track of that, and they think of themselves as being, I created all this value, or I made all this money, or whatever it might be. But it's like, well, there's a little, you're at right place, right time in a lot of cases. So I try not to ever lose sight of that. So just being grateful to be, well, and I think in a bigger picture, like, Silicon Valley and technology, what's going on right now, we're in a pretty unique time, right? If we were here 100 years ago, you wouldn't have all this opportunity, right? And who knows what happens 100 years from now, right? And so I think you have to be, you have to acknowledge and be conscious of there's these kind of windows where all this change happens. The change itself is exciting, but change creates opportunities, and opportunity creates value, right? And so all of that just, you happen to be in the right place at the right time, coming back to that. So for me, that's, I think, always in the back of my mind. And then at the end of the day, you got to figure out what really drives you, right? Mm-hmm. So if coming back to these, entrepreneurs, if what you're really worried about is kind of your checkbook and your bank account, that I think can be a pretty shallow way to measure life. And so for me, it's really more about, making sure you love what you do, you're learning along the way, but you're engaging with people that, that's rewarding for you. It's not always easy, and maybe these aren't people that you would necessarily, choose to spend a lot of time with, but you learn from them, right, along the way. And so for me, the people engagement, the conceptual, the new concepts, that all of that remains really rewarding.
And as every stage of your life, it was like progression, right? Yeah. Like it got to another stage where like, oh wow, the level is getting up. And from my former profession, I was a professional fighter. And when I was winning, the ego does get there, where people keep telling you this and telling you that, and then you start to believe it. And then you get a little bit of humble pie later on as time goes on, right? Have you ever felt yourself get that way, where there was a stage of your life where success was getting higher and higher, and then you're like, man, this is nice, and then there was a point of your life where it's like, no, wake up, stay grounded, stay true to what started the game?
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, it was probably early in my career in the venture business, at least, where this is going back to the dot-com boom and bust days. And, when, I first got into the investing side of the business back in the 95, 96 timeframe. And, that's right when the internet was really starting to ramp, and all of this, dot-com companies were getting off the ground. And for a while, it felt like you could do no wrong, right? Every investment you were making was getting marked up. And and I do remember, because that was really the first, as an investor, the first cycle I went through, and it was all up and to the right. And I was probably in 99 just thinking like, wow, this is, great. This, what's hard about this? Everything works out, and there's a lot of money to be made, and these companies are all going to the moon. and then things changed dramatically, and so that was, I think, a big slice of humble pie.
Yes. Yeah.
In that time frame, and it kind of comes. And by the way, those things can be pretty traumatic. When you live through years of just dealing with tough board meetings and shutting down companies and firing people, and so I think that's actually it's funny when I talk to younger investors getting started in their career. I actually think that they're better starting in an environment where things are challenging, because you see, right, what can go wrong and what the ramifications might be. And then when success comes along, I think you have an appreciation for success. I think the challenge over the last decade has been, especially in the era of free money, there's just been so much capital pouring in, which then distorts values, and therefore everyone felt like, this venture thing's easy and there's a lot of money to be made. And, I know a lot of both investors and entrepreneurs, executives, et cetera, take away the last couple years. But if you go 10 years back from there, they've only been in a market that went up and to the right.
Yeah.
And I think when things changed in 22, 23, that there were a lot of them that were kind of deer in the headlights, like, oh my gosh, I've never seen a downturn. We never had to fire people. What does that mean, right? And so, the cycles are good, and I think downturns are hopefully good learning experiences for people.
And I know every entrepreneur and anybody who's involved in business as well, they hit a point of their life where they almost want to stop. They're so burnt out, or failure just hit them so much that they're like, I need to move on and do something else. Have you ever hit a point of your life where you almost stopped everything?
Well, yeah, I did mention kind of that .com bust period. I mean, like I said, there were some years there where you're just, because of all this stuff bad stuff you're dealing with, and you have a hard time seeing, like, well, how do you create great companies again? Are we in this lull for a long time? And so, yeah, I mean, there were times when, I never thought, well, gosh, I should just hang it up, because, you're engaged with these companies. You feel a responsibility to make sure that all rides out. You feel responsible for your investors to make sure you're trying to create as much value as you can out of a tough situation. And so I never kind of felt like, oh gosh, I should just call it a day. But, you really kind of had to drag yourself, into the office some days. So, and again, I think if you go through that experience, hopefully the next time it happens, you realize, this, you may not love it then and there, but it'll end and things will change, things will bounce back, and it feels like we're back in maybe that place now. Did
you lean on a mentor or your environment or your team during that process?
Yeah, for sure. The at the time I was with another firm, but gosh, I give a lot of credit to my partners that were there, and you have a support. Ideally, if you have a good, coming back to team, right? Ideally, you surround yourself in your venture firm, not just kind of with your entrepreneurs, but your venture firm with people who are on one hand, supportive. They know kind of how challenging the business can be at times, and they're willing to kind of give you, provide positive encouragement along the way. But at the same time, they're also, at times, I won't say critical, but, being constructive, right? That they're not just always giving you positive, but it's always like, well, think about this, or worry about that, or, making observations.
Yes.
And so I think venture firms are very idiosyncratic. They're small groups of individuals, often with, strong personalities and strong conviction. But if you find the right mix, it can be really, really powerful.
It's sad to hear like the young entrepreneurs in like going on right now where they talk about being self-made or self this or self that. It's all about me, 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 me. And I tweeted something recently where, man, Elon Musk, he's not putting the tires on the cars. Jeff Bezos, he's not delivering packages. Santa doesn't make the toys. Like they all have teams.
Right.
And in your experience, having the team involved in every stage of your life is so essential.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to your point, I think a team is everything, right? It's, and I think importantly around team that we've seen with good entrepreneurs, you asked about kind of successful traits, is they'll, what you want is a team that you don't want a homogeneous team. You don't want a team that has all the same strengths and all the same beliefs. And I think ideally it comes back to like how to create a cabinet, the whole Abraham Lincoln cabinet, right? But it's like you want to surround yourself with people who have different points of view, and are going to challenge each other a little bit, right? I mean, within bounds, right? And I think, you want something that's maybe got a little bit of differing strengths, right, on the team. And obviously, it's a hard cocktail to manage because sometimes the friction can be overwhelming, or sometimes maybe one or two individuals aren't fitting in properly, or what have you. But the team. It's easy to say that a team is everything. It's hard to execute well, and no one gets it right all the time, and so that's what keeps, I think, for me, that's the most fascinating part of the business, right? Is the personal relationships, and they change over time, right? What works well now in 2-3 years might not be the right fit anymore. So,
do you still carry that philosophy of meeting somebody new every single day?
Well, I wish I had both the time and the energy to do it. I actually, what I try to do now is keep up with the people that I've met along the way, because at some point it takes over where it's like, you're just trying to maintain as opposed to keep expanding.
Say, going back to time, are you very time efficient on where you personally put your time into?
I mean, I think that's obviously one of the traits that you need to try to develop to keep yourself afloat. I mean, it where you spend your time, I think, changes a little bit over time. I think I probably spend less time now when I first got in the business, I spent a lot of time reading and listening and just learning along the way, and I still do that now, but I just don't have as much cycles for it, to be honest with you. And so I wish I had I can go 48 hours without just being interrupted, and I can really dig into subjects and feel like I've learned something, but that doesn't happen anymore. So,
and you miss that, right? The learning aspect. I remember, who was this? Bill Gates. I remember they asked him, what's the worst thing that you're afraid of? He's like, I'm afraid I don't want my mind to stop working. Yeah. And I mean, he has this thing, I think he does this once a week, where he's just reading books for like an entire weekend. He grabs like 5 or 10 books, and he's just by himself in a little home by a river, just reading. And I'm like, man, that's the dream. No, that's great discipline. I knew there was an executive, Lou Cerny, at one of our companies at my previous firm, this company, New Relic, who he would take time out. I mean, he was the CEO of a company that became very, very successful. But he would take time out to, go on a retreat. And in his case, it wasn't necessarily learning, but he would actually sit down and build product, right? And which, as a CEO of a company is really hard to do. And so he always tried to stay close to that. And so I do think having these habits of, I'm going to carve out time. It's the old adage of, urgency versus importance, right? And so you always get sucked into the urgent. And I think, and I don't do as good a job as I should, but it's like, how do I make sure I carve out time to focus on what's important? Having such a background and such a high level education, how do you keep up that education? Like keeping it polished? I
mean, coming back to kind of this growth mindset, right? I mean, it's, putting aside the brand, right, of the schools, et cetera, it's really hopefully, it's more around just the pure, I love to learn, right? And I love learning about different subjects. And so that hopefully isn't, and I mentioned this earlier with entrepreneurs too. I mean, hopefully it's kind of a lifelong thing. Yeah. Right. I think people who are kind of like, check mark college and I did my learning and now, not think about that anymore is maybe not the right approach. So, the thing that for me is one of the most rewarding things about this role and this job and sector that we're focused on is the rate of change is so fast, right? Yeah. it can be overwhelming at times, and frankly, the scope of it has gotten so big. Like, the tech industry 30 years ago was just a small sliver, right? And now tech is everywhere, and now with AI also on top of that. So to me, I don't. Yes, I loved my college experience, and I felt like, gosh, I learned so much in those years. But I feel like I keep learning, right? And so right now, I'm trying to be, a student of what's going on in the AI world as much as I can, right?
Yeah.
And that's hard to keep up with.
And I think if you don't, say, participate in it, I feel like you're going to be multiple steps behind.
Right.
It's just like when the phones came out, everybody was terrified about that too, and now everybody's on their phones. Even when the internet came out, everybody was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Everybody's on the internet.
Yeah.
It's just technology has grown so much, but I think you need to be involved in it. Otherwise, you're going to be kind of clueless on like what's happening.
Yeah.
So what's your whole philosophy with AI, especially in the experience that you've had throughout technology when it first came up from Apple's little computers and now this?
Well, yeah. So AI, obviously, we're big believers that the AI wave is going to be bigger than previous technology waves. Yeah. So if you kind of look back in history and you say, okay, there was, if you think about kind of major transformations, there was the advent of, the PC, and then, internet came along, right? Network and connectivity came along, and then there was mobile, right? And then there was the whole move to the cloud. And I think of AI as kind of being that next big wave. Each one of those waves had a bigger impact, bigger companies, more value got created, bigger, it touched more people and more things along the way. And so I do think that AI will be bigger than any of those previous trends that we saw. I think the other thing that I like to keep in the back of my mind is something one of my old partners said to me decades ago. He said, people tend to overestimate the impact of a new technology in a 2 to 3 year time frame, but they underestimate it in a 10 to 15 year time frame, right? And so, you look back in the .com boom, going back to that time frame, and at the time it was like .com, right? Everything's .com, and people thought, wow, this is phenomenal. But here we are, 25 years later, and internet models are still evolving, and it's bigger than, who would have guessed that you would be able to do as much as we're doing right now back then, right? So the AI thing to me is this category where I think we all know it's going to be big. How it's going to get big and what kind of impact it has is sometimes hard to fathom in advance. I mean, I know you can probably see some of the next steps or two, but you can't see 4, 5, 6 steps down the road and the impact it has. And so, we're big believers in the impact of AI. Now, because it's going to be so pervasive, I kind of think of it as in slightly different categories, right? So there's sort of the AI and its impact, right, on companies and how they operate. And then there's AI as part of the offering that you're selling to your end customer, right? And those, I think, are two slightly different things. Yes. And so, much as open source software, cloud computing made startups a lot cheaper to start up, right? And created this explosion of new startup companies because all of a sudden you didn't have to go buy a bunch of servers and, build all this code that, was just foundational. Now you get for free. It's all open source, right? Yeah. And so building product has become a lot easier compared to 10 or 15 years ago. Again, and therefore supported a bunch more startup companies, a lot more innovation came along as a result. AI, I think, has the same kind of power, right? So all of a sudden your engineers become a lot more productive because now AI can help you write, And so that makes, and it helps you create content for marketing, and it helps you, figure out what your customers really want in a more, insightful way. And so I think companies become much more efficient when they leverage AI, and certainly the more native, the companies that grow up with AI as part, and the people who grow up with AI in their back pocket, I think can take advantage of that. So I think in general, it helps the whole entrepreneurial community.
Yes.
And then on top of that, it's like, well, now how do I sell AI to customers, right, in part of my product? And that too has, I think, huge ramifications. So I don't I'm less worried about AI putting people out of business or taking away jobs or what have you. I think tech didn't do that for most people. It certainly did it did maybe replace some really menial jobs and factories and manufacturing and some things like that. But at the end of the day, I think in general it's helped, right, across broad swaths of society, and I believe AI has the same potential to do that.
Yeah, and I think people were just currently intimidated and scared because they're worried about the whole job replacement. I think that's why people are so intimidated by it and shying away from it, because they're like, it's going to take away our jobs. What are we going to do? So on and so forth. I think that's probably why they're just nervous.
Yeah. But I mean, I think the easy analogy is, did having computers and printers take, replacing typewriters that really take away jobs? Yeah, well, maybe you needed fewer typists, right? But at the same time, people who know how to use computers, like hopefully, most people do now, they have more, they're more efficient, right? And they've got more productivity that comes out of it.
Yes.
And I think to your point about, I think you need to embrace it. You need to kind of learn as much as you can about it so that you can be more productive when the AI tools are all there.
Yes. And it is a new skill. And I think that's why it intimidates people as well, because it's another thing that they have to adapt to.
Right.
Because even for me, like when I started a podcast, I had no idea how to edit. I had no idea how to do this, move this over here, boom, 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 boom. I did not know. And then I just kept polishing it, showing up for it every day. And then it got better. And now it became as easy as breathing.
Right.
And now there's an AI tool out there called Autopod that edits your entire podcast for you.
Yeah.
So instead of spending hours sitting on a screen, you could just do it in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God.
Does it work pretty well?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So every time you talk, it's on you. Every time I talk, it's on me.
Yeah, that's
it
great.
just cuts everything for me.
That's perfect.
But like you said, it's good for entrepreneurs because they're using it for whatever venture they're in.
Right.
So I think it's important. Don't shy away from it. Utilize it.
We talked about growth mindset, right? I think to be a productive citizen, maybe the right word or not, but I think if you really want to feel like, I'm an important part of, I'm an integral part of society, right? That you're really kind of plugged into it. You really have to have this growth mindset, which is like, hey, I'm willing to I'm willing to acknowledge I may not know. I'm willing to be a little uncomfortable because I have to learn this stuff, but I'm going to learn things, right?
Yes.
And I'm going to get better with it. And I may not ever be the very best, but at least I'm not gonna get left behind, right?
Yeah.
And I think if you're really digging in your heels, that's not the most productive way to approach it. And again, technology is so pervasive now that you just can't duck it.
When you guys are investing into a business or a company, what is it like when they have a variety of competition?
Well, yeah, so I would kind of characterize the companies that we're investing in. Some of them are going after markets where there are, incumbent players, legacy players, and you're the disruptor. You're coming in and changing it. You have a product that's cheaper, faster, better, however it might be. And so that's kind of one bucket that we can talk about. And then the second is that you're, creating a new market opportunity, right? And in which case, maybe there really isn't direct competition, but you do know that if you're successful, there will be other people pursuing it. And I think the entrepreneur, the startup world these days is responsive enough and information flows quickly enough that almost never see a single company going after a market. There's always several that jump on the idea. Maybe some are fast followers. Maybe they come up with the idea at the same time, but there's always multiple companies. And so competition we're always evaluating competition for any of the companies that we're pursuing. And, there can be some different philosophies around that. For sure, you want to believe that the company you're funding, their product is differentiated, right, and has a way to maybe for a certain set of customers, it's better than maybe some of the competitors' products, right? So that's one way to differentiate. Yeah. But the other thing too is that the market's always changing, right? And the competition evolves. So you also want to believe in the capabilities of the company and the team to keep innovating and
Yes.
evolving the product, right? Because if you're
Yeah.
standing still, then you're going to get left behind. And so we're always trying to evaluate those two things, which is how do things stand today? How will things evolve over time, right? And there are a lot of examples of companies that maybe had a better product, but the other company or set of competitors executed better. They had better sales and marketing, or maybe they're a bigger company that had a lot of customers already, and so they had that incumbent advantage, if you will. So, yeah, that's a really critical thing that we spend a lot of time, thinking through. Is
Yeah.
how do you win?
But competition is also good for innovating.
For
Right.
sure. Oh yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
necessary to have competition.
Yeah, and again, I have a hard time thinking of there are not a lot of monopolies that get created that are a monopoly from the get-go. They may evolve that way over time, right? You can argue some of the big tech companies have eventually gotten their way into that, but through their development, they were competing, tooth and nail against dozens of other players, right?
Yeah,
So,
I know. I always say that example, like Burger King, McDonald's. They're always shooting at commercials like, oh, they put 2 patties. Oh, we got to do 3.
Right.
There's always some sort of innovation. It's like, oh, okay, we got to do it better.
Yeah, which is great. Which I think is what makes us all interesting.
Exactly. Well, Fred, we are approaching that time now.
Yeah.
So I want to be very respectful of your time. So the last thing that I want you to be able to do is pass on the word of wisdom to the young entrepreneurs out there. Because I have a very young audience, and I know they're just scratching and clawing for answers. And for somebody like you to pass on that information and that value to them, what's that one thing that you would pass on to them?
Yeah, the thing I do tell a lot of entrepreneurs. So I will say that this whole idea of entrepreneurialism and doing startups is really sexy, and has achieved it has a lot more prominence now than it might have in the past, which I think is great, and I think that's super healthy. I do sometimes see entrepreneurs who want to start something for the sake of starting something, right? So they can say, well, I'm an entrepreneur, and I've been listening to all these podcasts, and of course that's the journey I want to have. But I think at the end of the day, the best entrepreneurs are people, we talked about this earlier, who have a passion for a problem. They see an unsolved problem in the market, an unmet need, and they try to go out and solve it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a much better way to embark upon being an entrepreneur,
Yes.
right? Don't start with like, oh, I want to start something, now I got to figure out what the problem is, but rather like, I see a problem and what's the best way for me to go solve it. And by the way, that applies to whether you're starting a company or a nonprofit or some social cause or whatever, right? But it's just trying to create change, positive change, right? Not change for the sake of change, but rather, positive change.
Yes.
So that's what I often tell people who are coming out of college or business school or something, right? And all of a sudden they're dead set on being an entrepreneur. It's like, well, okay, what's the problem that you're most passionate about? Let's start with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Fred, are there any closing statements you'd like to give for the podcast?
No, really enjoyed it. This was great. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, Fred, it was an honor and a pleasure meeting you, honestly. And I know, like I said, Offer, you are a very productive man, and I appreciate you giving me your time. Truly, thank you. It was an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all for tuning in to today's episode. If you got a lot of value out of this, please do me a favor and support our channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. Make sure to hit that follow button on Spotify to stay updated with our latest episodes. And if you are listening on Apple Podcast, I would greatly appreciate it if you would leave a 5-star rating, followed by with a review. Again, thank you all for the support. Stay loving, stay hungry, and stay excellent.